from States of Guernsey, Elisa Martel. I'll cheat and ask this question. Would you be committed to ensuring that carers are protected from discrimination by law as quickly as possible? So the discrimination legislation that's been approved in principle, will you stick to the timetable that's been approved?
Absolutely, I am, and I was pleased that we managed to speed up the delivery of the discrimination legislation through the amendment, which I supported.
Yes,
So what is the timetable for this, for the carers to be?
Carers are in the first wave, so the laws should come into force in 2 years' time. 2 years.
And the reason for the delay, is it just a funding or?
What delay?
The delay, well, 2 years time.
Well, it's going to take that amount of time to put the legislation together, put in processes and guidance. These things are never very quick, but it takes a time to just get the legislation in place and go through all the approval process.
Okay.
But it's happening, which is a really good thing. It's taken 4 years just to get to the point of getting the policy letter to the States through, and a lot of consultation took place for that. And yes, but I was pleased because at one point it looked like ESS kind of were apologetic in many ways about what they proposed, but I think Black Lives Matter and what happened in the US made such a difference, and it really kind of turned the tide, and I think it's been really good for that.
That's great. And Andy, can we get...
With all the sort of racism and all that, is it all in that same policy as the carers one, is it?
Yeah, everything was in there, but what they were proposing is, racism was on the first list, so was disability, carers, but other things were put further into the future, so like sexual orientation was going to be further back, so that's been moved forward now through an amendment that...
Can this one be pulled forward?
No, this is as soon as you can do it, because now we said this is what we're going to do, but what we did in this term was say, yes, we want legislation for this now, but now that means that the law officers have to go away and put it into draw up the law, yes, and then that has to be reviewed and ensure that that's fine. And then also you need to know how it will work in practice. You've got to train, so employers need to know, and everybody needs to understand what the new law is. So things like that's what causes it to take time to do it properly. And it's one of those things, government works really slowly, but the alternative is you put things through the public, so, I didn't know anything about that, and we haven't been made aware of it. It's that fine balance of getting it right. You don't always, and sometimes we are too slow, and sometimes we don't get it right, we're too quick. But it's hitting that sweet spot where we do the right amount of engagement, we get the right views, we listen to those views, we put them into policy letter, get that approved, and then get the legislation.
There was quite a lot of pushback, particularly from business organisations against the discrimination legislation coming in.
Yeah.
So from our point of view, now that it's been approved, we really want a States that's going to be supportive and make sure that the timetable is stuck to, and that there's no attempts to derail it again.
Was the work one, was it just down to, so they could pick more widely, if you know what I mean? Be more selective?
Yeah, full support. So I did engage on the business side, so I had a lot of consultation came in there. I completely admit I had my apprehensions at first. As I kind of came around to it, I would say actually one of the bigger apprehensions from a business side was it being drip fed in. That for me was actually proves a bigger problem than having one big thing to deal with and one big change, as opposed to we've got to do this year. And then the following year, so although I wouldn't see any delays, if we saw like a 1 year delay, but it meant it all came in one go, I would be in favour of that. I admit that's a bit of a delay on short-term gain, but long-term I think that would be better for business.
So, as you probably know, Gary, the anti-discrimination legislation was discussed and agreed in principle, and now they're drafting the law and coming back with the law. So the question is, would you be committed, if you were elected, to making sure that that sticks to timetable and that carers will be protected from discrimination by law as soon as possible?
Yeah, absolutely. I was in the States between 2012 and 2016, so when the regional policy letter came in 2014-2015, I was totally on board, and it's been a bit of a disappointment hearing the huge delay in this, and what we're hearing is that it's going to take several years to do the chunks. And this is something I was chatting about downstairs, of whether we've got a lack of legal resource to be able to do this, and if that's what's stopping it, well, let's find an extra $200,000 to get some bobs in there to get this done. But I can't stand it, because surely we can piggyback off some of other places' legislation, because we're behind the game in this, and actually get on with it. So I'm totally in support. You know, for me, as I said, you know, if there was an opportunity, if I was elected, I would stand as a disability champion, and for me that would be the key thing to hammer every week, where are we, what's going on. So.
It's very much reliant on professional skilled performers giving away their talents for free. We should be happy to turn up and do what we do, but we're trying to run businesses, trying to make it our actual income, and especially for young people to look at it as a job development. So our question to you is, what value do you place in the arts as part of the economic recovery and the social development?
A massive part of the post-COVID events like that, Earth Fair. We were the only place in the British Isles that were actually organising these events. So I really value the arts over here.
I'm going to give a slightly unpopular opinion. Because of the nature of the island and the events that go on, I think it's a small economic enabler, because we're trying to attract international business, and arts are going to be limited, and now there's some things on the tourist side we can do, but definitely on the social side of things it's huge. I think it's hugely important to our society, so to encourage it.
I always support the arts in all its aspects: music, art, drama, sports, which is a kind of art, although it is a separate commission, of course, and has more money than the arts, which I've never understood. The need for a centre is very important, and I still would like to see the information centre to be the arts centre, personally. I think it's totally wrong to consider there should be a boutique hotel there. It's just daft. So either an arts centre or the Victor Hugo Centre, one of those two, because they both have a very important place to play in the culture of these islands, and they do encourage people to come and see various things. We've got Renoir, we've got that coming up again now. We have other people, Kapan, Naftul, all those artists who have made such an important life for Guernsey, and we need to support it somehow. So we need to have more money for the Arts Commission.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. We do have a problem. I think the biggest thing when you look at it is the cost of housing and accommodation in the island. When you actually look at someone's salary and how much they spend and getting on that. So I've always been a supporter of Guernsey Housing Association, the programmes there, and it's a real shame. The States, for whatever reason, the last 4 years, I was a politician between 2012 and 2016, not been in these last States, but for some reason a lot of capital work hasn't happened, and we've still got 300 people on a waiting list. But actually what we need is more smaller units, affordable units. And so for me, I get really annoyed that we are creating multi-million-pound landowners overnight. The green area, suddenly someone's got it, they can charge £200,000 or £300,000 for a plot of land. And for me, the bricks and mortar still only cost £150,000 to build a house, but it's that piece of land it's on. But the end result is people are having to pay higher rents or higher mortgages to own that. So we've got to tackle that. That's got to be the fundamental thing to be able to help everyone across by bringing house prices down. Now, clearly a lot of people don't want that. If you own a house, you don't want your house price to go down. So, but we've got to do something. That's why I've always supporting the idea of certain sectors, like a first-time buyers sector or more social health, and to help that. Now, back in my time, we actually joined up the two schemes with the housing and social security, and I'm getting mixed reports at whether that's working or not, and there's people falling in the gaps of that actually we need to support. So I'm totally on board that we need to do something, because the gap is getting wider and wider and wider. And actually, an interesting sort of stat, we know that the squeezed middle, are actually the ones having less children because they can't afford it. So we ended up having, when you look at more children being born into poverty at the bottom that are struggling. So I think it's something that seriously the state needs to look at sooner rather than later.
So you'd identify the proportion of income spent on rent as a key determinant of poverty, and so you would look to reduce the cost of living, cost of housing, sorry.
The supply, because they're like anything, supply and demand, at the moment there's a finite, but actually if we worked with a housing association and created some extra housing that's more affordable, clearly people can then move, so landlords will go, I'm not going to charge £2,000 for this or £1,500. I've got to bring down my prices, which will naturally ease the depressed prices, which will actually help everyone. So for me, that has always been the answer for Guernsey. I mean, currently at the moment we've got about something like 1,000 to 1,200 permissions to build housing, but the developers don't want to because they want to drip feed onto the market, keep prices high and keep their profits high.
So an increase in affordable housing is going to change the contours and the statistics favourably. Now obviously we've got a social housing population of about 2,000 at the moment, and a large proportion of those are claiming benefits and are still susceptible, if not suffering from relative poverty. What would you do to, essentially you've tackled the housing cost issue for them, what else would you do to...
I think there's lots of other options over to the States. I mean, if you've got the people that are just there that are paying some sort of tax, I still think that we need to look at our tax system that are actually increasing personal allowances. I mean, like for me, I work in finance, I have a very good job. Why do I get a personal allowance? I don't need, if I paid all the extra tax, it wouldn't bother me. So actually those people at a higher level should have their personal allowance sort of drifted away a little bit, compared to the people at the bottom that are paying some taxes, and that's just taking them over the edge. But we also know that there are problems with the caps, because some people might be able to get some extra work but don't want to, because then it suddenly puts them over a cap, and so all of that needs to again be looked at.
So you think there's some disincentives within the benefits system?
Yeah, there are some disincentives, because people say, well, I don't want to go to work because actually I'm better on benefits, and the mentality should be actually we should get people into work one way or the other, because actually that's better for their well-being, better for them, better for maybe the children to then get into preschool. So again, I was a big supporter of the free introduction of preschool, because again it's that early learning ability early on to get people into education, and in fact, listening to some of the experts, we need to do more of that. We need to get children more into...
So you're describing a sort of a proportion of people in receipt of benefits who could work but are choosing not to because they don't see that it would pay more than they're getting at the moment. Is that fair?
Well, I think that is reality. I think a lot of people, know those that maybe more of it single parents that have got small children say, look, I'm not going to go to work, look after children. I mean, that also is one thing that I think we really need to tackle when you look at the weekly child allowance, that actually we know people in this island. I know people that say, oh yes, I put that money in the account for little Johnny to get a car when he's 17. That's what it's not designed for. I mean, it costs Guernsey roughly about 8 million quid a year, and actually you think, well, actually there are a lot of wealthy parents on the island that would need that. I mean, it's the same. The States have decided to change for the doctors to reduce the fee for children, but that's across the board. But actually, like I said, me and a lot of my friends, it wouldn't bother us if the doctor's was £50 or it didn't.
So maybe look at
again,
of benefits.
Where's that kind of couple of million going to come from? Like actually, that million better in the system, helping those already suffering at the bottom. That 400 families that are going to food banks.
Sorry, I didn't.
Sorry.
I represent Carers Guernsey. So I'll ask you the same question I asked the previous one on fairness. The anti-discrimination legislation that has been approved in principle, if you were elected, would you be committed to having that stick to timetable and for carers to be protected from discrimination as quickly as possible? What are your thoughts?
My thoughts are yes, I think. Having been a teacher, and I know I've been spoken to the GBA the other night, and I've talked to actually some young carers, and I know some of my students are actually young carers, and the strain that it can put on them, and I know the difficulties that it's not fair in a way that some are not getting relief, and so I think it's a very sensitive issue, and I think we often underestimate how big that issue is. So yes, I would very much improve making sure that it's the daily job.
Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Carers is in the first stage, so 2022 looks realistic. As you know, I was part of the team on Carers Plan. I was overseeing it to a certain extent to report back to Health and Social Care. I didn't get to attend too many meetings, but my interest arose in the 90s when I actually worked with Carers National Association. When I say worked with them, I'm a solicitor, and I advised on community care issues, disability living allowance, housing benefit, etc. And because I had green form legal aid, they referred me to whoever needed their help, and I went to Tribunal for them. And carers, for me, people don't know their carers, so one of the things that my contribution to the carers plan in particular was to put that number one, to find out who are carers. Young carers in particular are so lost in the know. They don't think that looking after their mum or their dad is caring. They just think that as a carer, formal carer, it's of course caring, but it's what you do. And getting support to the young people who do that is just so important, and respite, of course, and all that. And I think that going through to 2022, get it protected, that not only will it be private organisations, but more importantly, the states will be in a position to.
Guernsey. I think I'll just ask a really open question as to if you were elected. Is there anything in particular that you would do to support carers' rights in the next term?
I spoke to somebody last week at one of the functions that was at St Pierre Park, and it was a young boy who was 12 years old, and he looks after his mother. He's her sole carer, and he gets like 3 hours a week assistance, and I think that's from the third sector. I think really honestly, for a little boy of 12 to have to be do child things and go through education, then come home and look after his mother and get 3 hours a week sort of assistance is appalling. So we have to put some sort of system in place where carers are actually given respite, better respite than that, and probably better assistance and maybe breaks and things, so that they can actually, especially with young carers, they can actually be children again.
Interestingly, on the opposite end of the spectrum, in terms of my example, is my grandmother, who's looking after my granddad presently, and she's a sole carer, even though she has very little support. They've been married for 40, 50 years. I think with them they will need. So as I said, they're 40, 50 years together. He's got dementia, and I think she needs a lot of support around respite carers. There are charities that do assist with this, so Health Connectors, that sort of thing. I think they do a tremendous job. The issue is, I think they need more resources, or more staff, more training, in all honesty, more money.
I'd go for carer. Well, carer is one of those awkward words because it has at least 3 meanings. You can care for somebody in the sense that you're their friend or their partner, and then there's the carer that people are talking about who are part of a family, a grandchild, a child, a husband, who's caring with day-to-day needs, and then of course there's the professional carers who are in the public sector and the private sector, and now the carers who work in extra care and many other places, they're probably under-resourced. They were under-trained at the beginning of the COVID crisis. I think the care issues have been flagged up in Guernsey, Jersey and the UK. Carers, like nurses, are structurally underpaid, partly because it's perceived as a female occupation. Sometimes there's a lack of regulation in the field and a lack of coordination. I've sat on social security great years, and we broadly support evolution of SLAWs, supported living and ageing well, and refunding of care. Maybe an issue has cropped up in the campaigns, the need for new care homes. I would personally go for another extra care facility in the countryside somewhere. But the issues we're talking about, caring for a family, I think the financial package people are given through the welfare system isn't sufficient. And only a few weeks ago I had a difficult constituency case of somebody who, actually several people, who found themselves in the situation where they had to give up their career to cope, but they weren't being suitably rewarded to pay the mortgages or the rents. And another side of that, was coming out of the employment sector, was in one case, because of coronavirus and also mobility, I mean, goodness me, there's no lift up to here, I don't think, you know, that they had to move out from an ageing mother with dementia, perhaps, away from the family home, which was unsuitable, to a summer let that normally would have been done by, you know, sub-catering tourists. Cost them a fortune, and finding their way around that, although thankfully I think we got an understanding approach after a while from the social security.
I'm representing Carers Guernsey, an independent charity supporting carers. I'll ask you a pretty open question. If you were to be elected, what would you see as, was there anything that you would do to champion carers' rights in the States?
I think the main issue, I'm sort of dealing with carers at the moment because my mother-in-law and father-in-law, both in their 90s, have carers, and the main problem I'm seeing is the amount that they're being paid for what they're doing, really. It is, we've got one that's sort of almost on the beck and call.
Yeah.
Literally, they can, my sort of mother-in-law could phone her up at any time, and she comes round, actually in her own time as well, without sort of being paid. And the remuneration that she's getting for it is absolutely minimal, so literally pay them what they're worth.
Is there a minimum wage?
Well, we represent more unpaid carers, so it would be more supporting your mother-in-law and dad-in-law.
Yeah, that is actually quite limited, having experience with that myself. With my mother and my sister actually does quite a considerable amount of work while she still has a 9-to-5 job. And if she, I seem to recall it was £80 if you do a 36-hour job, and obviously she couldn't do that if she gave up her own job. So that's quite across the board, I would have thought. Very difficult for people that are part-time to do that, because you can't afford it. And so a full-time professional would be getting 200 or 300, but if you actually help out, you get 80 quid on them. It just doesn't work, does it? And yet you're doing a job that other professionals are doing, looking after your mother or father or some elderly infirm relative. You know? So I often do wonder how the states think you can possibly, well, how can they get away with paying you that kind of wage?
Okay, I'm a carer myself. I've got a 22-year-old son with complex needs, co-carer with his mum. We've not been together for the last 20 years, but we still, split the care. Respite care is something that we need, desperately need. There's not enough respite care. There's some people I know that are only getting about 8 hours a year. We need more units. Like we've got the extra care units, there's 2, Shortbricks have got 2 places up at the Grand Hotel. They need more of those because they're always rammed. There's only one with wheelchair access. Paul touched on the carers allowance. Carers allowance, if you're co-caring and both of you are providing more than the 35 hours a week care, you don't both get your £79 carers allowance, it's split 50-50. But the law is actually written, it's wrong. I've had arguments with Social Security about this over the years. The law actually says, the legislation, and Megan Pullen, Her Majesty's Procurator, confirmed with me, that the legislation actually says it's for care provided on that day. So I was never claiming, carers allowance when I was claiming it for the days that his mum was providing care. I was doing it. And it's just, there's a complete disparity there. It needs to be looked at. Emily's aware of it because I spoke to her about it when I first came in the States because it was on my mind. It's just more resources and out-of-hours support, because between the hours of 9 and 5, you've got support. You can always go to Jessant, for example, or someone like that if you need some help. Out of hours, the only support you've got is A&E or the Guernsey Police.
Can I come back to something you're doing?